and welcome to the Rational Living Show. I am your host, Dr. Aldo Pucci. This is a weekly show that is broadcast live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern United States time. I am president of the National Association of Cognitive Behavioral Therapists, an association that's based in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. I developed the cognitive behavioral approach called Rational Living Therapy, and I've been very blessed to share the approach of Rational Living Therapy, to teaching that approach with therapists all over the United States and in other parts of the world. I'm also author of 2 books, The Client's Guide to Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, which is now in its 2nd edition, and Feel the Way You Want to Feel No Matter What. You can find both of those books on Amazon.com. This is an interactive show, so if you're listening on Podbean, you can use the app to ask questions. You can call in with the app to ask questions. But if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook or X or LinkedIn, you can type in your questions, and I'm glad to answer any questions that you have. The title of this week's show is Understanding and Conquering Depression. Understanding and Conquering Depression. So what I'd like to do today, this week, is to begin the show by reviewing something that we talked about the very first episode of the show, and that is the emotional ABCs. And for those of you who are watching with YouTube, you can see the ABCs on the screen here. But if you're listening, you can listen to the emotional ABCs. So whenever we feel a feeling or engaged in a behavior, 3 things happen, and this is what we call the ABCs of emotions. And please keep in mind that these ABCs apply to you and to me and to everyone else whose brain is working properly, okay? So the first thing that happens whenever we feel a feeling is we become aware of something. That's the A in the ABC. So in other words, we see something, we hear something, someone says something to us, we make use of our senses to become aware of something, okay? The next thing that happens is we think or believe something about this thing that we're aware of. That's the B in the emotional ABCs. So we think or believe something about this thing. Now, the way we think about this thing will be one of 3 different ways. This will either be a positive thought, a neutral thought, or a negative thought. Okay. So an example of a positive thought would be something like, this is a good thing. A neutral thought would be, this is a bad thing. And a negative thought would be, this is a bad thing. And a neutral thought would be something like, this isn't a good thing or a bad thing. It doesn't much matter to me, or I'm indifferent. Okay. Now, the way we think about what we're aware of then tells our brain how to make the rest of our body feel. And that is the C, the emotional consequence. And it also tells our brain how to make our body act. That's our behavior. Okay? So naturally then, a positive thought about this thing that we're aware of tells our brain to make our body feel a positive feeling. We're happy, we're excited. A negative thought tells our brain to make our body feel a negative feeling, depressed, angry, anxious. And negative only means that it's an unpleasant feeling, not that there's anything at all wrong with feeling that way. And a neutral thought tells our brain to make our body feel a neutral feeling. Now, most people do not know what a neutral feeling is because no one bothers to teach us this. But the word that best describes a neutral feeling is the word calm. Kind of like, have you ever sat in front of a television and not feeling particularly happy so that you noticed, or upset so that you noticed, but just kind of sat there? That is calm feeling, okay? But now notice, that is not no feeling. It's not like you're numb from head to toe. What you're feeling there is calm, and that's a very important thing to keep in mind when we're talking about learning how to feel better, okay? So we're aware of something, we think something about it, and then the way we think determines how we feel and what we do. So naturally then, what we are saying here with the emotional ABCs and what we're emphasizing is an important biological fact. So it's not just a theory, it's not just a hypothesis, it's a fact that our thoughts cause our feelings and behaviors, not people and situations and things and events. And I say, thank God for that, because if that were not the case, then we would be people's and things' emotional slaves. So anytime things went, life went in a certain way that we did not like, then or if it wanted us to be upset in some way, or people wanted us to be upset, then we would have to be, because they would be making us. But thankfully, it's our thinking that causes our feelings and behaviors. So therefore, if we're feeling a way we'd rather not feel, we can learn how to think differently so as to feel differently, even if the situation doesn't change. And that's the key. Our situation need not change one iota for us to change the way we feel and act, because we can change the way we think. So a lot of people think, in terms of depression, a lot of people think that to not be depressed, my situation has to change. My situation has to improve. Well, first of all, as we're going to see, it's never a person's situation that causes them to feel depressed to begin with. It's always our thinking about situations that cause us to feel depressed or anxious or angry or happy or any other emotions. So it's our thinking. So therefore, our situations never depress us. Our situations never cause us to feel depressed, no matter how bad the situation personally might be for us. So, and then the other thing to consider is that sometimes people's situations improve, but they still feel depressed. And so you might wonder, well, why would that be? It's because their thinking hasn't changed accordingly. So even if a person's situation does change, let's say it improves in some way, if a person doesn't change their thinking along with it, they will feel the same, okay? So the bottom line is this: for us to change the way we feel and act, we have to change the way we think, okay? So the emotional ABCs teach us and emphasize the fact that it is our thinking that causes our feelings and behaviors, not people, situations, and things and events. And please remember that this is a call-in show, a live call-in show. So if you have any questions you'd like to call and ask about, you can use the Podbean app to do that, or you can type in your questions. And if you're watching on YouTube, for example, I'd be glad to answer any that you have. Okay, so we're focusing on depression today, and so let's take a look at what actually is depression. Depression actually has three parts. So what we're saying with the ABC model is that emotions have three parts. There is what a person is aware of, what a person thinks about what they're aware of, and then the emotional consequence to what a person thinks about what they're aware of. Okay, so when it comes to depression, there are three parts. The first part is what a person is aware of. And as I say here on the screen, for those of you who can see it, it can be absolutely anything what a person's aware of, what they're reacting to. It's usually the awareness that a goal is not achieved or will not be achieved, okay? Then there is depressive thinking about what a person's aware of. And that depressive thinking is something usually along the lines of, this is a terrible, horrible thing. My life is over. There's no way I'll ever be happy again, and that's terrible. I need to achieve this goal, and I never will. Something along those lines. Okay? And so then, because a person thinks this way, they then at C will feel and act depressed. So they will feel their depressive feelings and act in a depressive way. For example, crying, lethargy, decreased or increased eating, decreased or increased sleeping, etc. Okay? So notice what I say here. Without all three components, what you are experiencing is not depression. Okay? So, for example, if a person is not reacting to something, then it's not what we call, how we define depression. Perhaps their symptoms are the result of hypothyroidism, for example. Or if a person's not thinking depressing thoughts about something, then it's not depression. Perhaps it's an adrenal problem or anemia. And certainly if a person's not feeling depressed, then it's not depression, okay? So we need all three components: aware of something, thinking depressing thoughts about what you're aware of, and then the logical consequence of that depressive thinking, and that is depressive feelings in your body and depressive actions, okay? All right, so all three components are required. So the problem is this, is that most people, including many, many therapists, here, let me go ahead, including many, many therapists, label any down feeling as depression. You know, so if a person goes to their doctor, goes to the therapist, says, I've been feeling down, automatically the professional will call that depression. But in fact, that is not the case. Just because a person's feeling down does not mean it's depression. So in rational living therapy, the approach that I take, that thankfully I developed, we make the distinction of learned as opposed to not learned behavior, okay? Learned as opposed to not learned emotion. And the two most important things that I look for when a person comes to me for therapy, and it is important for you to examine for yourself, is first of all, is the person's emotions, are their emotions and behaviors a reaction to something, okay? So a person comes in and says, I've been feeling depressed. What I want to know is this feeling a reaction to something? Okay. Some life circumstance, you know, something past, present, or in the future that they're reacting to. Okay. If it's not, then there's probably a something wrong with their body. Okay. And so we need to get them checked out medically. Also, what I'm looking for is, does the person demonstrate any voluntary control over how they feel? So if they say, well, yeah, sure, if I visit with my grandchildren, I feel better, you know, or if I go bowling, I feel better. I don't feel as depressed. I even feel happy at times. Then that's demonstrating some voluntary control over the behavior. Otherwise, if it doesn't matter where they are or what they're doing, they feel the same regardless, then, and therefore they show no voluntary control over their emotion, then we might think that there's something wrong with their body that's causing these symptoms. So therefore, that's not depression. That's perhaps hypothyroidism, for example, okay? So people will come to me and say, well, Dr. Pucci, I'm depressed. And so the very first thing I ask them is, what are you depressed about? If they can tell me, well, you see, my wife left me and I love her so much and I don't know how I'm going to live life without her and all these, then I know they're reacting to something. Okay, and so it's pretty likely that this is a learned depression as opposed to not learned. It's the result of their thinking, not the result of something that's wrong with their body. Okay, but there are times when a person's down feelings can be the result of a physical problem. Someone asked, depression is not a real thing. Well, no, certainly it is. And certainly it is. So what we're doing is making the distinction is, are the person's feelings the result of their thinking? You know, that they're thinking about something that they're aware of, something that's going on. You know, perhaps they just lost their job. Perhaps, they developed an illness of some kind. and now they're thinking very depressing thoughts about it, very hopeless thoughts about it, and so they feel depressed as a result. That would be learned depression, and so therefore the therapy could be very helpful, can be and is very helpful for situations like that. But if a person says, I've been feeling down, and especially if they say, it's come on me all of a sudden, just all of a sudden, I started feeling down, and but I'm not depressed about anything. My life is good. I can't think of anything that's, I would be upset about, but I feel down all the time. And they might also say, my hair's been falling out, and I've been gaining weight, and my hands are cold. And so we'll suggest to them, well, let's get you checked out medically. Maybe you have a problem with your thyroid, for example. Okay. So what are some causes of depressive symptoms that is not actual depression, but feels like it? Well, things that can cause symptoms like that are hypothyroidism, for example, a sluggish thyroid. Anemia, if a person has an iron deficiency or B12 deficiency, for example, they might be anemic, and that can cause those symptoms. Adrenal insufficiency, Cushing syndrome, Addison's disease, low testosterone. Sometimes as men get older, they start feeling down and sluggish, and they wonder what's wrong with them, and it turns out that their testosterone is low. And so when they correct that problem, they start to feel much better. Menopausal, perimenopausal hormonal changes can cause depression-like symptoms. Pituitary gland problems, Lyme's disease, mono, and as well as COVID-19, some of the symptoms of that. Medications can cause symptoms like this as well, such as beta blockers, for example, that slow down your heart. Corticosteroids like prednisone, for example. Statin drugs sometimes can, like Lipitor, to lower cholesterol. Benzodiazepine, medications typically prescribed for anxiety like Xanax and Ativan can cause depression-like symptoms. And certainly hormonal medications as well. So what often happens? Let me see if there are any questions over here. All right. Okay, great. So what often happens is a person will feel down. They will feel what seems like to them is depressed. They go to their doctor, and their doctor tells them they have a chemical imbalance. And they might go as far as to say, you have a serotonin problem. You need a medication like Prozac, for example, which is what's called an SSRI medication, or other ones like them are Paxil and Zoloft, for example. But if you were to ask your medical doctor to prove that you have a chemical imbalance, that you have low serotonin in the synapses of the neurons in your brain, he or she couldn't do it. Well, actually, they could do it, but the test for that requires you to be dead, which is a little too late then, right? So this is a guess. This is a hypothesis. Well, maybe the reason the person is feeling this way is because they have insufficient serotonin in the synapses of the brain. So what they do is they give a person the medication, and then if they start to feel better, they say, well, that must have been it. I must have been right. They must have a problem with serotonin. The only problem with that, well, we're going to talk about that problem here in a moment. You see, years ago, researchers developed this drug called Prozac and others like them. They saw that some people, when taking it, felt less depressed, but they weren't sure why. So they came up with a theory as to why, that it must affect the level of serotonin in the synapses of the neurons in the brain. So that was their hypothesis. The problem with that is research has shown over and over again that these medications largely do not work. There is a strong placebo effect. As a matter of fact, one researcher discovered that 82% of the effect of SSRI medications is placebo. So the person feels better because they think they're going to feel better. Okay. So if they were given a sugar pill, an inert pill, it would have worked just as well. It would have worked 82% as well as the medication. Did you know that Prozac was derived from Benadryl? Years ago, I had a pharmacist who attended one of my trainings, and I mentioned this to the class, that Prozac was derived from Benadryl, and he raised his hand and said, "There's no way that Prozac was derived from Benadryl." I said, "I'm telling you, it was." Weeks later, I received this big package and wondered what it was and who it was from. It was from him, and it was this huge article on the fact that Prozac was derived from Benadryl, and he said, "I'm sorry, you were right." And so what it does, if it does anything, if these SSRIs do anything, is they numb the limbic system. Like they put a wet blanket over the limbic system. The limbic system is the part of the brain that signals to the rest of the body how to feel. So whether you feel anxious or depressed or angry or happy, it's the limbic system that directs the rest of the body to do that. And the limbic system gets the signal from our thinking to produce that. Okay, so the limbic system is involved in all emotions, and so if the SSRIs do anything, what they do is reduce the activity of the limbic system, which means it makes it harder not only to feel depressed but to feel any feelings. And so what many of my clients have told me over the years who were already on an antidepressant like that prior to coming to me is that when they stop taking it, with their doctor's help, when they stop taking the medication, they start saying to me, I didn't realize how much I wasn't laughing at jokes, while I was on that medication. But now I am. And by the way, this is one of the reasons why they often prescribe that type of medication for anxiety problems, because it makes it harder to feel anxious as well. Now, you might be wondering, well, why am I mentioning this? Well, because you see, people often are told that if they take this pill, they will feel better. It will fix their depression. And very often, it doesn't. And then the person thinks even more hopelessly about getting better, because they think, well, if even the medication doesn't help me, then I must be a hopeless case. Well, what I'm here to say is that fact is that they really don't work that well. Okay, 82% of the effect is placebo. So this is good news. If they haven't helped you much, now if they have helped you, God bless you, fantastic. Who am I to argue with that? But if they haven't helped you, there's a good reason for that, and it's not your fault. Okay? So our thoughts cause our feelings and behaviors. If we're feeling depressed, it's because we're thinking depressive thoughts about whatever it is that's going on. So the task is to correct those depressive thoughts so that we feel more like how we want to feel. Okay? By the way, I wanted to mention that if you are a therapist and you would like to get trained in the rational living therapy approach, please visit CBT Online Training, all one word, cbtonlinetraining.com. And you'll find the rational living therapy, different levels for certification, and many other training opportunities there, cbttraining.com. Okay, so now, let's put this back up here then. So now let's talk about the difference between depression and sadness. What's the difference between the two? Well, It all begins with the confusion of need and want. The confusion of need and want. Oh, by the way, someone asked, so the medicine is a waste of time? You need to control your thinking? Well, let me put it to you this way. If there is a physical problem that is causing depressive symptoms, then indeed it would be important to correct that physical problem. Otherwise, it's the thinking that needs corrected. It looks like we have someone that wants to call in, Frances. Let's see if we can get her on. Frances, are you on? Okay. All right. Well, so it begins with the confusion of need and want. And let's briefly review this. We've talked about this in other podcasts. That in rational living therapy, we teach that there are two kinds of needs. There are absolute needs and there are conditional needs, okay? Absolute needs are those things that are required for survival, those things that keep us alive, such as air, food, water, a certain amount of warmth. Sometimes a person needs a particular medication to remain alive. Everything else on this planet is a want, a desire. The only problem is often, very often, people mislabel wants as being needs. So therefore, how do they feel when they go without them? The same as they would if they were going without air and food and water. You can see it in their actions, you can see it in their reactions, that they're equating something with a life or death situation. Okay? So imagine, for example, a person comes to me and let's say a guy does, and he's shaking, his voice is quivering, and I ask him, what's the matter? What's going on? He says, my wife left me. Now, in that situation, is he acting as though he wants his wife and he sure will be disappointed if she doesn't return? Or is he acting like he needs his wife, as if she is air, food, and water to him, and he's just going to drop dead any second, right? His body doesn't lie. We can see that he's equating this with a life or death situation. So, what I'm going to help him to eventually understand is that no matter how outstanding, fantastic, wonderful, terrific, and unique she is a want, thank God, and not a need. Especially, thank God, if she doesn't return, right? Now, there are conditional need statements that may or may not be accurate. For example, an example of a conditional need statement would be something like, to make a chocolate cake, you need chocolate. That would be an accurate conditional need statement. Right? But if we went to the store and we couldn't find any chocolate anywhere, and we panicked over not being able to make the chocolate cake, then we would be equating it, a chocolate cake, with something that we needed, like that we would drop dead if we didn't have. That we certainly can debate. So the question is this a matter of life and death, or is this an inconvenience, maybe even a huge inconvenience, but still just that, an inconvenience, okay? So that distinction between needs and wants, absolute needs and wants, is so very important. Okay, so you might wonder, well, what does this have to do with depression? Well, with depression, there are two components. Okay? The first is hopeless thinking about something. Okay? And by the way, what we teach in RLT, hopeless thinking is necessary. As a matter of fact, we're going to do a show just on this. Hopeless thinking is necessarily a case of jumping to conclusions. Okay? Of jumping to conclusions. Why? Because as a matter of fact, hopeless thinking is based on a very arrogant assumption. Now, a person's not trying to be arrogant at the time, but it's a very arrogant assumption. And that assumption is, I know all there is to know about this problem. And if I do not see a solution to this problem, one must not exist. One cannot exist if I do not see one. Okay? So you can see how arrogant that is. And so what we teach is that no one knows all there is to know about anything. Okay. So we begin with hopeless thinking, but many people believe that hopeless thinking by itself causes depression. And what I say that not only does hopeless thinking by itself not cause depression, hopeless thinking by itself cannot cause depression. It depends on what a person is thinking hopelessly about. Okay? Is it something that they think they want or something that they think they need? Because you see, when a person thinks hopelessly about something that they realize they only want, they feel sad. They're disappointed. For example, let's say I say, this is my favorite pen. I'm really looking forward to the next time that I write with this pen. Okay. So let's say tomorrow I come into my office here and I look all around for this pen. I can't find it anywhere. I'm hopeless about finding this pen. You will not see me depress myself over not finding this pen. Why? Because I realize, thankfully, that this pen is something that I only want. So it's my preference, it's my desire to write with this pen, but I in no way need to. So therefore, if I can't find the pen, I'll be disappointed and therefore sad. See? But if someone were to say to me, I've always wanted to know how to be severely depressed, but no one's ever taught me. Could you show me how? I'd say, okay, well, first think that you need something, have to have it, you cannot live without it. And then swear you'll never get it. Think as hopelessly as you can about it. That is an outstanding formula for depression. Okay? So when people depress themselves, what they're doing is two things. They are thinking hopelessly about something that they think they need, they have to have, they cannot live without. Okay? As if they will die if they don't have it. And so therefore, when working at counseling yourself rationally, or if you're a therapist helping people to counsel themselves rationally, there are two tasks that we have. One is to work at correcting the hopeless thinking about your situation, and then correcting the confusion of need and want. The problem is most often in therapy, only the hopeless thinking is addressed. But this need idea remains in the person's brain, waiting for the next time they think hopelessly about this thing that they think they need. You see? So imagine a person is, let's say a guy is standing on a ledge, tall building on a ledge, getting ready to jump off in reaction to his wife having left him. If he allowed me to talk with him, to try to help him to come down off that ledge, I would help him with the hopeless thinking first before I helped him to correct the need versus want. But we need to do that as well, okay? So the first thing I would do is help him to understand you cannot prove that there is no way to encourage your wife to return. The only thing you can prove is that you do not know of a way. So why not come off that ledge and give us an opportunity to see if there might be a way? Wouldn't it be a shame if you jumped off and on the way down, a way occurred to you? Heck of a time to figure that out, right? Your goal is not to die. Your goal is to have your wife back in your life, which is considerably more difficult if you're dead, okay? So once he comes off the ledge, then I would help him to understand eventually that no matter how outstanding your wife is, she is a want, thank God, and not a need. Okay? And the reason why that's so very important to correct is because if we do not correct that mistake, where do you think he's going to head the next time he thinks he's going to lose his wife? Right back out on that ledge, right? And so that's why sometimes people will depress themselves over and over about the same thing, because their self-counseling is very superficial, or the counseling, the therapy they're receiving from their therapist is very superficial, because it's only dealing with the hopeless thinking and not the confusion of need and want. So it's very important to correct both. Okay. And we're going to talk about how to do that in greater depth in future podcasts. Okay. So depression is caused by hopeless thinking about something you think you need, you have to have, you cannot live without. Then what happens is what I call the rational living therapy behavioral loop model. Why do people persist in depressing themselves? Well, largely because, number one, they continue thinking the depressing thoughts and do not see a good reason to think otherwise. But secondly, because of inaction. For example, lying around, not doing much productive, refusing to work toward a goal. Why would I if I think there's no way I'll ever achieve it? And what that is negatively reinforced. Negative reinforcement is, well, first of all, reinforcement is anything that increases the likelihood that you'll repeat a behavior. Okay? So with negative reinforcement, what it's doing is taking away something you don't want. For example, you have a headache. You take aspirin. The aspirin removes the headache. That is negative reinforcement. And because it removed the headache, you're more likely to take aspirin again in the future if you have a headache. Okay. So how does inaction, how is it negatively reinforced? Well, because first of all, if I remain on the couch, I avoid even more disappointment. You see? Or if I remain on the couch, I avoid doing things I don't feel like doing because I'm depressed. So that's reinforcement of that behavior. And sometimes there's negative reinforcement there's reinforcement of the belief, the depressive beliefs. For example, I would not be lying around all day if my situation were not hopeless. In other words, I wouldn't be feeling and acting this way if my situation really weren't as bad as I'm thinking it is. Okay, so they think that their behavior confirms or their thinking, and that's problematic because it doesn't. So just because you are feeling and acting as though you're depressed does not mean your situation is as bad as you are thinking it is. Okay? It just means that you are sincerely thinking those thoughts and creating those depressive feelings as a result. Okay. All right, great. So, and remember, if you have any questions, please be sure to ask them. You can call in with the Podbean app, or you can type them in if you're on YouTube, for example. Okay, so inaction is depression's best friend. So next week, we're going to talk about getting active and moving through depression, even if you don't feel like it. Because one of the worst things a person can do when they feel depressed, when they're depressing themselves, is to be inactive. Because, for example, if I'm lying on the couch feeling sorry for myself because my wife left me, it does not give me the opportunity to see that I could be happy with something else, or doing something else, or with someone else, or doing something else, you see? And so it's very convenient. It's very easy to continue to think depressing thoughts as long as we don't give ourselves the opportunity to gather new information, to see that we might be wrong in our thinking. So next week, we're going to talk about how to get active, move through depression, even if you don't feel like it, even if you don't see any point in doing it, how to do it anyway. Okay. All right, let's see if we have any Okay, someone asked, I'm on a small dose of SSRI, didn't feel well on a full dose. Taking it as anti-anxiety, shall I drop it? Seems to help with anxiety, eating disorder. I finally feel hungry and eat. Well, first of all, that's a discussion to have with your medical doctor. Whether it's okay for you physically to stop taking it, and or in what way. If you're finding some benefit taking it, and you're not suffering in any way from taking it, then it might be then you might wonder. What you're looking at is it rational for me to take this? Well, if it's not harming you and you're finding some benefit from it, then you might determine that it is rational for you to continue taking it. Okay. And same person at the same time, intensively practicing rational thinking and ABC, going to smart groups. Terrific. That's wonderful. Yeah, that's great. So continue doing that. This is the Rational Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Aldo Pucci, and I certainly thank you for your support. And be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to us on YouTube. And tell your friends and family about our Rational Living Therapy Show. Look forward to seeing you all next week. Everyone, take care.